The Edict of Horemheb stands as one of the most striking political documents of ancient Egypt, not because of its poetic grandeur or theological innovation, but because of its brutally practical concern with corruption, abuse of power, and administrative decay. Issued at the end of the 18th dynasty, circa 1320 BCE, the edict reflects a moment of profound crisis and attempted restoration within the Egyptian state. It is, in essence, a manifesto of order against chaos, a legal and moral reset following decades of instability caused by religious upheaval, weak governance, and unchecked officialdom. In my view, the Edict of Horemheb is less a sudden reformist miracle and more a desperate, calculated attempt to save a system that was visibly rotting from within. Historical background: Egypt after Amarna. To understand the edict, one must first understand the world Horemheb inherited. The late 18th dynasty was shaped by the Amarna period, initiated by Akhenaten's radical religious reforms. Akhenaten's focus on the Aten marginalized the traditional priesthoods, disrupted economic networks tied to temples, and weakened centralized administration. While his theological revolution may fascinate modern scholars, its political consequences were catastrophic. After Akhenaten's death, Egypt was ruled by a succession of weak or youthful kings, Smenkhare, Tutankhamun, and I, under whom real power was exercised by courtiers, generals, and priests. Corruption flourished in this environment. Officials exploited tax systems, soldiers extorted civilians, judges accepted bribes, and local administrators treated royal authority as a personal asset rather than a public trust. Horemheb, a career military commander, rose to power not through royal blood but through competence, alliances, and timing. By the time he became king, the state apparatus was fractured, public confidence in authority was low, and the prestige of kingship itself had been damaged. The Edict of Horemheb must be read as a response to this systemic breakdown. Nature and purpose of the edict. The Edict of Horemheb is preserved on a large stone stele erected at Karnak. It is written in formal legal language, but its tone is unusually sharp and accusatory. Rather than praising the king's divine perfection, it catalogues crimes committed by state officials and announces harsh penalties for them. This alone makes it remarkable. The edict addresses abuses committed by tax collectors, military personnel, judges, provincial administrators, temple officials. Its primary purpose was not to create new laws, but to reassert old ones that had been ignored. Horemheb presents himself as the restorer of Maat, the cosmic and social order that underpinned Egyptian political ideology. Corruption, in this worldview, was not merely illegal, it was a violation of the natural balance of the universe. What strikes me personally is how modern the document feels. The complaints, bribery, illegal taxation, abuse of soldiers' authority, are painfully familiar, reminding us that state corruption is not a modern invention but a recurring feature of complex bureaucracies. Specific reforms and legal measures. The edict outlines a series of concrete reforms, many of them punitive in nature. Among the most significant are: 1. Judicial reform. Judges who accepted bribes or altered verdicts were subject to severe corporal punishment, including mutilation and removal from office. Horemheb explicitly condemns judges who ruled according to favor rather than law. This emphasis on judicial integrity suggests that courts had become instruments of elite power rather than neutral arbiters. Without trustworthy courts, the entire state structure would collapse, a reality Horemheb seems to have understood clearly. 2. Taxation and economic abuse. The edict condemns officials who confiscated goods beyond what was legally owed to the state. Soldiers, in particular, are accused of seizing boats, cattle, and labor from civilians under the pretext of royal authority. Horemheb's response was uncompromising: offenders were to be beaten, stripped of rank, and reassigned to forced labor. The message is clear: royal service is not a license for personal enrichment. 3. Military discipline. As a former general, Horemheb paid special attention to the army. Soldiers abusing civilians threatened not only justice but political stability. By enforcing discipline, Horemheb aimed to restore the army's role as protector of order rather than predator of the populace. 4. Centralization of authority. The edict also reorganized administrative oversight, placing trusted officials in key positions and limiting the autonomy of local authorities. This move reflects a broader attempt to re-centralize power after decades of decentralization. Political strategy behind the edict. It would be naive to read the edict as pure moral idealism. Horemheb was a shrewd political actor. By targeting corrupt officials, many of whom were associated with previous regimes, he simultaneously eliminated rivals and legitimized his own rule. The edict portrays Horemheb as the chosen agent of the gods, sent to punish wrongdoing and restore justice. This narrative was essential for a king without royal blood. Law, morality, and divine will become tools of political consolidation. In my opinion, this dual function does not diminish the edict's sincerity. On the contrary, it highlights how reform and power are often inseparable. Horemheb needed legitimacy, and Egypt needed reform. The edict served both. Effectiveness and limitations. Did the edict work? The honest answer is, partially, and probably temporarily. There is evidence that Horemheb successfully stabilized the state and restored administrative discipline. His reign was peaceful, economically stable, and institutionally coherent. Moreover, his decision to appoint Paramessu, later Ramesses I, as his successor ensured continuity and laid the groundwork for the strong Ramesside state. However, corruption did not disappear. Egyptian history after Horemheb shows repeated cycles of reform and decay. This suggests that corruption was structural, not accidental. Large temple economies, powerful local elites, and hereditary offices created conditions where abuse was almost inevitable. The edict treated symptoms more than causes. It punished corrupt behavior but did not fundamentally redesign the system that produced it. Still, given the historical context, this may have been the only realistic option. Ideological significance. Beyond its legal content, the edict is ideologically powerful. It redefines kingship as active guardianship of justice rather than passive divine presence. The king is no longer merely a god on earth, he is a moral enforcer. This shift is subtle but important. It reflects a broader trend in Egyptian political thought during periods of crisis, when rulers emphasized justice and reform to reassert authority. Horemheb's legacy, therefore, is not just administrative but conceptual. Conclusion. The Edict of Horemheb is one of ancient Egypt's most revealing political documents. It exposes the vulnerabilities of imperial bureaucracy, the persistence of corruption, and the constant struggle to maintain maat in a complex society. Far from being an abstract legal text, it is a snapshot of a state fighting for survival. In my view, Horemheb deserves recognition not as a visionary revolutionary, but as a pragmatic restorer. He did not invent a new Egypt, he repaired a broken one. The edict embodies this ethos, stern, conservative, corrective rather than creative. Its relevance today lies not in its punishments, but in its diagnosis. When institutions weaken, corruption flourishes; when authority collapses, justice becomes selective; and when reform is delayed, it must eventually be enforced with severity. The Edict of Horemheb reminds us that the fight against corruption is as old as the state itself, and just as difficult.